Okay, so this is a video that's number 2 in our series of making our first ASP.NET web application. So the first video covered how to develop or how to start our application. We went over how to start it in Visual Studio as well as Visual Studio Code. We also covered how to add in projects to our Visual Studio Code application. And we covered a little bit more about the .NET CLI. So we went a little bit further into the .NET CLI for anybody using VS Code. So this lecture is going to go a little bit further into the book. So if anybody started up using the MVC template, there's going to be a little bit of cleanup we have to do. So what do I mean by that? So let's go here. Let's go ahead and launch our application. Let it go ahead and look through those task files that VS Code made for us. And here is our application. So our application feature value, we have a home page, we have privacy. So it looks like it tried to do some stuff for us. It gave us a link building web apps with ASP.NET Core, which probably takes us to some Microsoft documentation. So this is all stuff we really don't want, and it's stuff we could circumvent if we went ahead and used the empty template, but if we didn't, we'll have to get rid of some of it. So if we use the empty template, it'll give us, essentially it'll just give us our app settings.json files, our proj file, our program, and our startup. But it doesn't give us any of the MVC folders. So if anybody goes through and does an empty application, we're going to be missing a lot of this. And that's actually what your assignment will be for this week, is to start your own MVC application from an empty template. So what we're going to do is get rid of some of the junk that we don't need in here. So I'm going to expand the controllers folder, the models folder, and the views folder. So here's this privacy view that they gave to us. I'm going to delete that. Here's our home index. I'll go ahead and delete that. Here's all of our shared, and I'm going to end up recreating these in this lecture, so I'm going to delete some of this stuff. I'll delete that. Here's a general error page. I'll delete that. I'm going to end up making a new view import, so I'm going to delete that, and a new view start, so I'm going to delete that. Here's our models error view model. I'm going to go ahead and delete that as well. And here's our home controller. I don't know if it uses yet, but it uses the error view model, so now that's broken. And we can see when it breaks, when it no longer compiles, it turns your solution red, it turns your project red, it turns the folder red that it's broken in, and it turns the file red that it's broken in. But luckily for us, I'm going to go ahead and delete this file since I'm going to make my own home controller. And then after I deleted it, I thought it would be fine. Looks like it's still not liking something. Anyways, once we create a new controller, it should be fine. So now I want to go ahead and create a new controller. So in Visual Studio, let's go ahead and open Visual Studio, and I'm going to make an empty template. I believe in the .NET CLI, it's .NET new empty. .NET help. .NET new help. So .NET new help should tell us exactly what templates we can use with the .NET CLI. There's a class library, there's a console application, where is our... Looks like the .NET CLI even gives us the view start and view imports. That's pretty cool. So there's our MVC, model view controller. There's web app. I figured it would be called something like empty. I went too far down. Let's go make this bigger. Web API. Okay, so it looks like if we use web, it'll give us an empty web application in the .NET CLI. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use Visual Studio to create it for me, just to show you exactly what it looks like. Let's continue without code. File, new project. I want to create an ASP.NET Core web application. Next. I thought this would have... Let's go back. All project types. Let's click web. This core web application. I'm not seeing an empty template here unless I'm missing it. .NET Framework, which is not what we want. Let's go and do that. Core Apps, Visual Studio. I'm just going to go and leave everything the same and click Create. Okay, and that brings us to this screen. Okay, that's what I was looking for. So if I click Empty here, it's not going to generate all of this MVC stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as empty and then click Create. So if you don't want to delete all of the stuff that you're not going to use, you can just create an empty template, which will just give you those base files. And remember I said the program startup, the app settings.json here, and then some dependencies and properties. So there isn't any model viewer controller folders. You have to create those yourself in an empty application. So I can add new folder. So I'm going to add views. It says I'm making this views folder, I'm making this models folder, I'm making this controllers folder. So now I can click new, add folder, controllers, add new folder, models. And now since we have a controllers and models and views folder, now we have that base MVC template set up again in our project. So if I click controllers, add, and you can see that it gives me a little bit of context, and it knows that I right-clicked on a folder named controllers because at the top it actually tells me controller. I think you want to add a controller since you just right-clicked on the controllers folder. So I can click add, I can click that, and then I can use an empty MVC controller. Click add. I'm going to go ahead and use the controller class. It says home controller. It probably noticed that it was an empty folder. So it went ahead and prompted me to call it home. And that's actually what I was going to call it anyway. So controller class dash empty, home controller, and add. And now it went ahead and made my controller for me. So it knew that I needed to inherit from the base Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC controller. It went ahead and updated the namespace for me. So what namespace would you like this class to be in? Well, my web application that I named very poorly is web application 1. And then people usually put their controllers in the .controllers namespace here. So starting from an empty template, I went ahead and added my model view controllers framework here, and then I went ahead and added my home controller. So going back to Visual Studio Code again, it's not a lot more work, but if it was an empty template, again, you'd add these folders, and then if you wanted to add a new controller, you want to make sure that you have this controllers folder selected. You can come up here, and this is where you'd add the new folder. So this is a new folder button, but it's already here, so I can add a new file. I want this file to be called home controller.cs. So you notice home controller doesn't help any, but if I put .cs, then it knows it's a C# file. So I'm going to hit enter, and now here is my home controller. But notice it's a blank file, there's nothing here. So back in Visual Studio, it gave all this to me. So it knew that it needed to inherit from controller, it knew that what namespace it needed to be in, it knew what package to get this controller class from. But code doesn't know that much. We need to give code a little bit of help, which is fine. I like giving a little bit of help because it doesn't add in all this bloat like this. I'm not yet using this, and I don't know why it would assume that I'm going to in the future. So code doesn't make any assumptions. So first I want to put a new namespace. So a namespace in C#. I want the namespace's name to be future values, the name of my application, .controllers, just like our Visual Studio application. From there, I want to say public class home controller, and I want to extend the ASP.NET controller, where I want to inherit from. So then I want to make some curly braces for my class. And notice it doesn't know what this is because I have not yet imported it, so I'm going to control period. So control period is a context for help me out, there's a red line. Usually I use it so I don't have to put these using statements in myself. As long as you typed in the correct class up here, it should know, or it should be able to find a package that it currently has installed in the core environment or in the base environment that uses this class. And sure enough, here's our Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC controller. I'm going to go ahead and click on using, and that'll put in my controller using statement. So what else do I have over here? I have a public iActionResult index that returns a view. So I'm going to go ahead and say public iActionResult. And it's going to be named index. It's going to return an empty view for now. So what exactly does this do? Well, this returns to the caller, or ASP.NET essentially. ASP.NET is going to say, okay, I got routed to this home controller. Now exactly which action do I want to perform? And we'll cover that as the class moves along. But know that the default action for any controller to call is index. So essentially, if it can't find anything else to call, there's no route to tell it what to do, it's going to go ahead and just pass back the index route. And the index route is going to then return a view. So an iActionResult, notice this is what it returns, and then a view is part of that iActionResult. So notice view is part of the view result. So we're already seeing some polymorphism here. We didn't tell it that we're going to return a view result. We told it we were going to return an iActionResult. So a view result implements iActionResult, and we can return anything that implements this iActionResult. So maybe we want to return some JSON, we want to return some HTML, so we want to return a view, we want to return some Razor syntax. A lot of different ways we can return things to a Chrome application. And in this case, we're going to return some HTML, or some CS HTML. For now, we want to put some stuff on our view. So I'm going to add some stuff to something called a view bag. So if we look and I start typing in view bag, notice that Visual Studio Code knows what I'm typing in, view bag. And this is a dynamic object to hold different values for our view. So if I click view bag, I can click dot name equals Mary, and view bag, bag dot FV, which stands for future value, equals, so this is the future value, some amount of money we gave. So notice this doesn't have any errors. So viewbag.name, viewbag.futureValue, and then return the view. Okay, so now we added a controller index action. We want to make sure we add in a view that corresponds to this index action. So we want to return a view. So we want it to be able to grab a view to show in Chrome. So we have here, we have our views folder that I emptied out. So how do we do this? Let's go over to Visual Studio first. So Visual Studio, we have this views folder. Now let's go ahead and go over here. I'm going to copy this over into Visual Studio. And in my views, add. Notice it still knows the context I'm in. I'm going to add a view. So it probably figured out that I right-clicked on a views folder, and I want to add a view. I want to add in an empty razor view. I'm going to click add. And I'm going to call it index.cshtml, which is fine. I'm going to click add. So actually what I want to do here is I want to add a folder under this. So I'm going to say home. So now this is inside the home folder. I'm going to go click and drag it. So now I have views. So now I have a folder for all of the views that I have that correspond to this home controller. So here's our home index. So let's go ahead and put in all of the stuff we have in this index. So I'm going to create a layout, which we'll get into here in a second. Layout equals null. And notice that if we have this @ sign, we're essentially typing in Visual Studio or C# code right now. So notice that I have a syntax error, and that's because it needs a semicolon, because this is C# code now. So now we're putting in C# into our HTML views. So now we're going to do some boilerplate HTML. I'm going to make the doc type HTML. I'm going to close my HTML tag. I'm going to create HTML tag. I'm going to create a head tag. I'm going to create a body tag. Yeah, so now we have our basic HTML elements. I'm going to create a meta tag for the head. Name equals viewport. Content. So I'm just taking the view out of the book right now to save some time. Width equals device width. So it's going to take the width of the device to calculate exactly how big this thing's going to be. Title. Home page. There's some stuff in the body. We have an H1 tag for future value. We have a paragraph tag for customer name. And from here, we're going to take out of the view bag. So if you remember the view bag that we created, we're going to take out of the view bag to use it in those views here. So future value is in the view bag. .futureValue.toString. We're going to go ahead and format that as currency. So notice if we use this @ symbol, we can denote C# codes coming up. So once you have this @ symbol, it's going to say, okay, watch out, here comes some C# code for you. And then it knows to stop it when it finds a tag or a space or something like that. All right, so now we have a home controller, which takes in our stuff here. Then we have an index view here. So let's go ahead and copy this. So how do we do this in VS Code? I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to Views, Home. I'm going to add a new file, index.cshtml. And paste. And now let's try to run it. Let's go to the Run section, Run. Okay, now we can see that I took in from my view bag the name and the future value, and we can tell that it's all formatted in the way I made it. So I have this H1 element, and then I have 2 paragraph tags. So if I inspect, it should look like the view that I have in my view. And sure enough, here's my head element, here's my body. So it checks out, and notice that it's not C# code here, it's the actual values that I gave in the CS/HTML. So we took out of the view bag instead of hard coding it. So now we have dynamic web pages. So in the next video, I'm going to go over how to add in a model, as well as how to add in some other elements in your code, such as view starts, which make writing your CS/HTML a lot easier and a lot less cumbersome. So I'll see you in the next video. I hope this helped.